I'm Liz, 38 years old. Standing by the window where the morning mist still lingers, I gaze at the quietly awakening cityscape with a warm cup of coffee in hand. It looks like today will be another busy day. Mom, is breakfast ready? The voice of my 8-year-old daughter Sophia from behind brings me back to reality. As I turn around, I see her still in her pajamas, looking up at me with her hair still mussed from sleep. Good morning, Sophia. It'll be ready soon. But first, go brush your hair, okay? Sophia nods silently and slowly leaves the living room. This is how our morning interactions usually go with my daughter, who has autism spectrum disorder. On my way to the kitchen, I hear a baby crying. Looks like Grace is awake. I'll check on her, Liz, my husband Chris says as he comes out of the bedroom and heads towards Grace's room. He's in his suit, looking as busy as any other morning. Thanks, Chris. Breakfast will be ready soon. As I prepare breakfast, I reflect on our lives. Chris and I were college classmates who fell in love after reconnecting following my divorce from my previous husband. He's busy every day as a lawyer at a large law firm, but he's a kind and family-oriented husband. I work from home as a graphic designer, struggling daily to balance work and childcare. My divorce from my previous husband was due to differences in understanding Sophia's disability. However, Chris understands and accepts Sophia's uniqueness. Grace's birth was a miracle for us. A baby we finally conceived after 3 years of fertility treatments. It was a huge emotional and financial burden, but it deepened our bond even further. Smells good. What's for breakfast? Chris appears in the kitchen, carrying Grace. Pancakes. Sophia's favorite, I answer, kissing the baby's cheek. As I look around at my family gathered at the breakfast table, a feeling of happiness wells up inside me. However, I can't help but be conscious of a presence that casts a shadow over that happiness. Chris's mother, Peggy. A former psychology professor at the University of Chicago, she's an intelligent woman with a strong will. She's overprotective of her only son, Chris, and has shown disapproval of our marriage from the start. Peggy's coming today, isn't she? I'm concerned that her attitude has become even colder since Grace's birth. Her complex personality and the secrets of her youth might be influencing her current behavior. Hey, Chris. Are you sure about this barbecue party today? Don't worry, Liz. Mom will be happy too. Although I nod at Chris's words, anxiety remains in my heart. No one yet knows that this happy morning scene is the prelude to an unimaginable tragedy. I was busy preparing the barbecue grill as early summer sunlight flooded the garden. The bustle of Lincoln Park Zoo could be faintly heard. Liz, where's the ice? I turned around at Chris's voice to see him standing there with a cooler. In the freezer in the garage. Hurry and bring it, I answer, wiping the sweat from my forehead. It'll melt quickly in this heat. Several tables are already set up in the garden, decorated with balloons and a "Welcome Baby Grace" banner. This barbecue party, adopting the traditional American form of a baby shower, is also part of our neighborhood socializing. Wow, it looks amazing. Our neighbor Sarah entered the garden, carrying a homemade apple pie. Thank you, Sarah. I'm glad you could come, I greet her with a smile. I'm truly grateful for the warmth of our neighbors. As guests gradually begin to gather, the garden becomes lively. Chris's colleagues, my friends, and our neighbors. The diverse faces of the guests give it a distinctly American feel. However, amidst this pleasant atmosphere, there was one person who seemed out of place. Chris's mother, Peggy. Hello, Mother, I greet her with a smile, but Peggy's expression remains hard. Oh, Liz, she replies curtly, her eyes already searching for Grace. Grace is inside. We're keeping her in the air-conditioned room because it's so hot, I explain. I see. I sense a hint of disappointment in Peggy's voice. Something feels off. As the party progresses, I can't help but worry about Peggy's behavior. She seems to be constantly checking Grace's whereabouts and watching my movements. Hey, Chris, I whisper to my husband. Doesn't your mother seem a bit strange? Chris frowns. You think so? It's not like her, but... At that moment, Peggy approaches us. Liz, I'd like to talk to you about something. Peggy's voice carries a hint of suppressed anger. Of course. What is it? About your past. Peggy looks around before continuing in a low voice. Your divorce history and the time you were a single mother. I catch my breath. Why bring this up now? Mother, is there a problem with that? I ask. Problem? Yes, a big problem. Peggy's eyes flash sharply. You're ruining my son's life. What? My voice unintentionally rises. Chris hurriedly steps in. Mom, stop it. This isn't the place to. But Peggy wouldn't listen. You're after Chris's money, aren't you? I know about your struggles as a single mother. But I won't let you use my son. I freeze at Peggy's words. I had no idea she thought of me this way. The guests around us look confused by this unexpected turn of events. Mother, you've misunderstood. I truly love Chris. Just then, we hear Grace crying from inside the house. Oh, Grace is crying. Peggy suddenly changes her tone. I'll go check on her. With that, Peggy quickly heads into the house. Chris, we should go too, I say, unable to suppress my anxiety, pulling Chris's hand towards the house. As we enter, we see Peggy holding Grace in the living room. At first glance, it looks like a normal scene between a grandmother and grandchild, but something is off. Peggy's expression is more severe than I've ever seen it. Mother, please give Grace to me. I reach out, but Peggy backs away. Don't touch her. Her voice is trembling. This child. Chris approaches his mother with a confused expression. Mom, what's wrong? Give Grace to Liz. But Peggy shakes her head violently. No. This child isn't Chris's. Those words freeze the air in the room. What are you saying, Mom? Chris's voice is low, taking on a dangerous tone. Grace is mine and Liz's child. It's a lie. A look of madness appears in Peggy's eyes. You're being deceived, Chris. I say in a trembling voice, "Mother, please calm down. Grace is definitely Chris's." "Shut up." Peggy's scream makes Grace start crying. "You're a liar. You deceived my son and this child." Suddenly, Peggy starts moving. She runs towards the entrance, still holding Grace. "Peggy! Mom!" Our screams cut through the party's commotion. As we rush out into the garden, the guests are looking at us with surprised faces. Beyond their gaze, we see Peggy running away with Grace in her arms. "Liz, what happened?" Sarah asks worriedly. There's no time to answer. I chase after Peggy with all my might. Where is she going? Surely not. A terrible premonition crosses my mind. North Pond Lake, near Lincoln Park Zoo. "Chris!" "The lake!" I shout to Chris running behind me. I can see Peggy. She's running full speed towards the lakeshore. "Peggy, stop!" My scream cuts through the early summer air. Peggy stops at the lakeshore. As she turns around, I see a mixture of confusion and determination on her face. "This is to correct a mistake," Peggy's voice carries on the wind. And then, an unbelievable scene unfolds before my eyes. Peggy tries to throw Grace into the lake. No! I lunge forward with my last ounce of strength. I grab Peggy's arm. Grace's cry. Peggy's scream. My shout. Everything intersects in an instant. After a struggle, Grace's small body slips from my arms and flies through the air. Oh no, I couldn't protect her. As desperate thoughts cross my mind, my body moves on its own. A splash as I dive into the lake. Cold water envelopes my entire body. Where's Grace? I strain my eyes desperately. I faintly see white clothes. There. My high school swimming experience comes in handy now. I swim strongly towards Grace. I pull the small body close. As I try to return to the surface, suddenly my leg cramps. This is bad. The cold lake water is sapping my strength. Holding Grace, I desperately swim towards the surface. Liz! I hear Chris's voice from the shore. Here! I shout with a hoarse voice. I see Chris diving into the lake without hesitation. His strong arms lift me and Grace. Are you okay? How's Grace? She's safe, cough, cough. As we crawl onto the shore, I could already hear the sirens of an ambulance. Peggy was being restrained by police officers, standing there in a daze. Let me check the baby's condition, a paramedic takes Grace. I hand over my daughter with trembling hands. Please, help her. I fall to my knees, exhausted. Chris supports me. Liz, you did well. Grace is okay. I cry with relief at his words. Around us, party guests wear expressions of shock. Sarah brings us a blanket. Ma'am, you need to be examined too, another paramedic calls out to me. As I nod and stand up, my eyes meet Peggy's. Her eyes show a hint of regret. Why? Peggy doesn't answer my question. While the police take her away, Chris watches his mother leave with a complex expression. Chris, You don't need to say anything. Just rest now. I lean into his gentle voice as we get into the ambulance. As the sirens blare on the way to the hospital, I can't help but think about the meaning of this incident. Why did Peggy do such a thing? What will happen to our family now? As anxiety and fatigue wash over me, I close my eyes. Mrs. Liz Johnson. At the nurse's voice, I stand up from the waiting room chair. Chris is supporting me. Yes, that's me. I'll show you to the examination room. We have the baby's test results too. At those words, Chris and I exchange glances. Grace, please be okay. As we enter the white-walled examination room, a young female doctor is waiting. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. She shows a warm smile. Let me start with the good news. Your daughter is safe. At those words, my tension immediately dissipates. Chris squeezes my hand tightly. Thank you so much. My voice trembles. However, since she swallowed some water, we need to keep her under observation for 24 hours. We'll monitor her carefully due to the risk of pneumonia, Dr. Chen explains. Chris asks with a serious expression, is there anything else we need to be careful about? The risk of hypothermia has passed, but please be careful to keep her warm, at least for tonight. Also, we need to watch for stress reactions after the near-drowning incident. Dr. Chen adds gently, seeing our expressions, don't worry. Grace is a strong girl. Next, the doctor turns to me. Liz, about your test results, fortunately, there are no major issues. However, you're showing symptoms of acute stress disorder. Acute stress disorder. I repeat the words. Yes. There's a possibility it could develop into post-traumatic stress disorder due to this incident. I recommend counseling. Chris quietly says, we'll make sure she gets it. Dr. Chen nods and starts writing a prescription. I'll prescribe these medications. They're sleeping pills and anti-anxiety medication. Please use them appropriately. As we stand up, Dr. Chen adds, oh, and the police are here. They want to talk to both of you. Chris's expression clouds. I understand. As we step into the hallway, a uniformed police officer is waiting. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, may I have a word? Chris steps forward. My wife is tired. No, Chris, I place my hand on his arm. I'll talk too. The officer nods and guides us to a small room nearby. Please tell me about today's events in detail. Chris and I take turns explaining everything from the barbecue party to the incident at the lake. The officer takes notes, occasionally asking questions. Peggy Johnson is your mother-in-law, correct? Yes, Chris answers. My mother, she's been acting a bit strange lately. In what way? Chris hesitates before slowly beginning to speak. My mother had a secret. That I was adopted. I look at my husband in surprise. Chris is adopted. The officer frowns. how does that relate to this? Chris lets out a deep sigh. When my mother was young, she had an unwanted pregnancy. That child, me, she gave up for adoption. A heavy silence falls over the room. And that relates to this incident, the officer prompts. Yes, Chris nods. My mother had been carrying this secret for years. And when we had a child, I take over from my husband. Peggy convinced herself that I was deceiving Chris. That Grace wasn't really Chris's child. The officer nodded in understanding. I see. Peggy Johnson is currently undergoing a psychiatric evaluation. The next steps will be determined based on those results. As we stand up, the officer adds, "You've been through a terrible experience. Please, make sure to rest." As we leave the room, fatigue suddenly overwhelms me. Liz, it's okay now. Let's go home, Chris says. I nod weakly. Yes, let's go home. But, what will happen to us now? With that anxiety in my heart, we quietly leave the hospital. The morning sun streams through the window as I wake up. Chris is breathing steadily beside me. If only yesterday's events had been a dream. I think as I head towards the baby's room. As I approach Grace's crib, I can see her small body moving. A sigh of relief escapes me. Good morning, my angel. As I pick her up, Grace touches my face with her tiny hands. That warmth gradually dissipates yesterday's fear. Liz. Chris's voice calls out. Are you okay? Yes, I'm fine. I turn around to see my husband standing there, looking worried. Grace seems fine too. Chris comes closer and embraces us. I'm so glad, really glad. Just then, the doorbell rings. Who could it be, so early in the morning? Chris heads to the front door. On the other side of the open door stands a familiar face. Dr. Chen. Good morning, Dr. Sarah Chen says with a smile. I'm sorry to intrude. I came to check on Grace. We invite the doctor in. Yesterday was quite an ordeal, Dr. Chen says as she examines Grace. But this little one seems to be doing very well. Chris shows a relieved expression. However, something else lingers in his eyes. Doctor, Chris speaks up. Do you have any information about my mother? Dr. Chen hesitates for a moment before slowly answering. Peggy is currently admitted to the psychiatric ward. While we don't have detailed diagnostic results yet. But I prompt. It's likely she has complex PTSD. Those words make the air in the room heavy. Complex PTSD. Chris murmurs. Is it because of what happened when she was young? Dr. Chen nods. Yes. It's possible that the trauma she's been suppressing for years has surfaced due to recent events. I can't help but interject. But why did she target Grace? That's a characteristic of complex PTSD, Dr. Chen begins to explain. Past trauma can connect with current situations, leading to extreme behavior. In Peggy's case, her past experience of loss might have transformed into a fear of losing her granddaughter. Chris lets out a deep sigh. My mother convinced herself that Liz was deceiving me. That Grace wasn't really my child. Yes, Dr. Chen nods. That belief likely led to her actions yesterday. I hold the baby close, thinking about Peggy. She was suffering too. What should we do now? I ask. Dr. Chen smiles gently. First, it's important to take care of yourselves. Then, support Peggy's treatment. Family therapy might be effective too. Chris quietly says, I understand. We'll do whatever we can for my mother. Dr. Chen stands up. Well, I'll be going now. Please don't hesitate to contact me if anything comes up. After seeing the doctor off, we sit silently in the living room. A heavy silence falls. Chris, I speak up. I understand how you feel. My husband looks at me with sad eyes. Liz, I'm so sorry for putting you and our daughter in danger. It's not your fault, I take his hand. We're family. Let's get through this together. Chris nods. You're right. Just then, we hear footsteps coming down the stairs. We turn to see Sophia standing there. Mom, Dad. Is Grandma not coming anymore? We exchange glances. How should we explain this? Sophia, come here, I beckon my daughter. Grandma isn't feeling well right now. But she'll get better. Sophia nods silently. Then suddenly, she walks over to the piano. Gentle notes begin to fill the room. The tune Sophia plays seems to express our family's feelings. We listen to our daughter's performance in silence. The music soothes emotions that words can't express. This is what our family looks like, I think. Even when hurt, we support each other. Outside the window, a new day was beginning. Let's start today's session. Dr. Jennifer Ross's calm voice echoes in the quiet room. Our family sits in chairs arranged in a circle. Chris, me, Sophia, and Peggy. Seeing Peggy, complex emotions well up inside me. It's the first time we've faced each other since that day. Her eyes show regret and anxiety. Peggy, would you like to start? Dr. Ross prompts. Peggy takes a deep breath and begins to speak. I've done something truly unforgivable. At those words, the air in the room freezes. Chris leans forward. Mom. Peggy continues. I've been hiding a secret for many years. Chris, you're not my biological child. Chris nods silently. He already knew this fact. When I was young, I had an unplanned pregnancy. And that child, you. I gave up for adoption. Peggy's voice trembles. Since then, I've lived with this guilt and regret. Dr. Ross quietly asks, how did that experience connect to the recent incident? Peggy closes her eyes, searching for words. When Grace was born, I was reminded of my past loss. And I was driven by the fear that I might lose Chris. But why did you think I was deceiving Chris? I can't help but interject. Peggy looks at me apologetically. Liz, when I learned about your past, your divorce history and financial struggles, I imagined the worst. I thought you might be using Chris. Mom, Chris's voice resonates low. Liz and I conceived Grace after a long struggle with infertility treatments. I never told you about that process. Chris begins to explain in detail the hardships we experienced with infertility treatments. The repeated failures, the days we almost gave up. The days we kept hoping despite everything. I take over from my husband. Peggy, Grace is undoubtedly Chris's child. She's the fruit of our love. Tears well up in Peggy's eyes. Oh, what have I done? I was so trapped in my own fears that I hurt you all. Dr. Ross says quietly, past traumas can greatly influence current behavior. Peggy, you're now facing and trying to overcome that trauma. In the silence that follows, Sophia suddenly stands up. Grandma, her voice is small but clear. I loved the cookies you used to make. Will you make them for me again? Peggy looks surprised, then smiles through her tears. Yes, of course, Sophia. At that moment, the atmosphere in the room softens. Dr. Ross says gently, family bonds can sometimes be hurt. But by understanding and forgiving each other, they can become even stronger. As the session ends, we quietly leave the room. Outside in the hallway, Peggy approaches me. Liz, I'm truly sorry, her voice is shaking. For putting you and Grace in danger. I take a deep breath and look into Peggy's eyes. Peggy, you were suffering too. From now on, let's move forward together, understanding each other. Hope shines in Peggy's eyes. Thank you, Liz. Chris comes closer and gently embraces his mother and wife. We're family. Let's overcome this together. We nod silently at his words. Repairing damaged bonds isn't easy. But we have the courage to move forward, one step at a time. In the car on our way home, Sophia said in a small voice. Hey, why don't we all go on a picnic next time? We look at each other and smile. It feels like we're starting to see the shape of our new family. 6 months later, a small girl stands at the center of the stage, bathed in the brilliant lights of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra concert hall. Sophia takes a deep breath and sits at the piano. In the audience, we, her family, watch with nervous expressions. Chris whispers, "Do your best, Sophia." I hold Peggy's hand, sitting next to me. She smiles warmly in return. And then, beautiful music fills the hall. Sophia plays Chopin's Fantasy Impromptu. The audience is captivated by her music. I close my eyes and think back on the past 6 months. Family counseling, reconciliation with Peggy, and Grace's healthy growth. Our journey of overcoming difficulties resonates with Sophia's music. As the piece ends, loud applause erupts. Sophia looks at us with a beaming smile. At that moment, I was certain. No matter what trials await us, we can surely overcome them. Because we are family. On the way home, holding Grace, I looked up at the sky. A new morning awaits us, filled with hope.